Good morning, it's Rick from Automotive Consultants. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit about this Mantic clutch, and I'll show you. You'll see them a lot. It's high performance. We're putting it in a Dodge. It's a dual plate, clutch plate, light and clutch setup. And if you look online, you'll see this setup being shown. I want to say hundreds of times. But what I noticed when I was looking, that there were certain things that weren't addressed, and I want to cover those points that are important. And it's not only with the high performance clutch, but with any manual transmission. 90% of them have this system. And what I wanted to show you was when you take the transmission out, you can see over here, this is the transmission we took out. And you can see the old one. You get rid of your old stock clutch system. Behind the flywheel, when you see the back of the engine, there's two things you want to address. There's this rear main seal that you see right in here. When we first pull the transmission out, there is oil around the sides of it, and I could see where it was going to fail in the near future. You don't want to put in your high performance brand new clutch with an old main seal that's leaking. It's going to leak through, and the possibilities of it coming out and getting on your clutch and ruining it are there. And you can spend a couple grand on all your clutch parts. You don't want to ruin them because you went this far and you didn't change your seal. The other thing that doesn't come in the kit that I didn't see is what we call the pilot bearing. This is really important. The pilot bearing runs on the end of the crankshaft. You'll see the old one in here. This is the new one. It's got a roller bearings inside that support the main shaft of the manual transmission. And if we look at this transmission here, and I purposely didn't clean it, I wanted you to see what goes on here. The tip of this main shaft rides in this bearing like this. It goes over. I'm not going to put it on. I don't want the dirt on this new bearing. But it slides over and supports this shaft. The clutch splines here, and you can see these splines here is where the disc rides on. And I'll grab the old disc. And you can see it. There's splines in the disc. It slides on here. It should slide on here. So it has to move easily. On this one here, you can see where it's rusty. So there is some type of light lubrication you want to put on those splines. You don't want to do it heavy because it's going to fling out and get on the clutch disc. You don't want to contaminate it. But you want something on there, something light, just to keep the rust off it and to keep the disc moving easily. Because you don't want it to bind on there. It can cause chattering, make noise. But that's something that this has to be clean. You want to make sure this bearing surface is clean. There's no dirt on it. And that there's no worn area on this shaft. If you have a bad bearing that's seized up and it galls this shaft, and you put this back together, you're going to have premature failure of this new pilot bearing. So you want to make sure you clean it. You make sure this surface here, machine surface, is smooth and there's not any burrs that are going to damage the new pilot bearing. You can see here, this is your throw-out bearing setup that comes with the new clutch. And there's a whole bleed procedure with this that you're going to want to really look into when you're doing this job. One thing about this style of throw-out bearings is they're really labor intensive when you bleed them. What I recommend doing is when you have the new one, is you can hook up a way to put the fluid in and bleed this slave out as much as you can prior to installing this transmission back in the car. Saves a lot of time. So a couple things. Bleed this slave cylinder. Make sure this is clean. You can do a slight lubrication on the splines to stop this rust. Main seal. If it's showing signs of leakage, replace it. But you want to make sure when you put this seal in, and I'll show you the old one too, a little point here. Make sure when you get this seal in, you don't damage that sealing area when you install it. or you'll end up with a bigger leak than you had before, or you'll create a leak. When you put these in, you have to be very careful. There's a lubrication on the sealing lip, and when you install it over the edge of the crank, there's a chamfer here. You don't want to cut that seal, so be very careful with it. And you want to look around the edge and make sure that seal is pointing in, and it's not. Sometimes the lip will flip out, so you want to go make sure that's all in there correctly, and it has a slight lube on it. Make sure there's no burrs on that too. Then there's a silicone sealer that you ride into the area down in here, and then you're good. But that's a couple points that I think you ought to look at when you're doing your upgrade on your high performance. Oh, I'll get dirty. Magic clutch system. Thank you, Phil. Until next time.